in this video, we are going to look at a very common fallacy, one that's been attested for a long time, called the appeal to pity. We're going to look at what the appeal to pity is. We'll examine the argument structure of the appeal. We'll talk about why the appeal to pity is a fallacy. Then we're going to look at some common situations in which you can expect to see it. We'll look at 3 examples of the fallacy. We'll talk about some handy guidelines for how to spot it. Then for you students out there who need to be able to distinguish it from other fallacies, we'll talk about other fallacies that you might mistake it for and how not to mix them up. And we'll finish by talking about how you can avoid engaging in this fallacy in your own communication, reasoning, practical, problem solving, all these sorts of things. So what is the appeal to pity? We want to mention a few other synonyms for this. There's an old Latin term for it. That's how you can tell that an argument has been around for a while. The Argumentum ad Misericordiam, which basically just means appeal to compassion or pity or mercy. It's also called sometimes the appeal to sympathy. When we talk about somebody putting a guilt trip on somebody else, that's an appeal to pity of a certain sort. And even the Galileo argument is a special variety of this, where you say that, see, look what a hard time that guy or that lady has had, in presenting their views. Therefore, their views, we should pay attention to them, or they must be right. And what an appeal to pity really is, it's an attempt to provoke a sense of pity or compassion, feeling sorry for somebody, or guilt. Why? In order to get a claim rejected or accepted. And oftentimes these claims will be about what we call action items. You should do this, you should do that. But it could just be a claim about, here's what the case is. Frequently, the appeal to pity is going to focus on adverse consequences to the one who's being pitied, to the pitiable one, that will result if the claim is not accepted, or it focuses on their terrible present condition and the person who's being appealed to, their capacity or their duty to change it. Let's talk about the structure now. So notice we've got a couple different hidden premises that are just implicit here. We've got a couple that are above board. The conclusion is you should believe the claim X. And we're starting from person A is or will be in a bad condition. How do we get from that to you should believe X? Well, one of the other explicit premises, although it could be still implicit, is if X is true, then person A is going to be helped. But usually that's going to be explicit. The implicit premises are things like, well, you ought to feel pity for a person in a bad condition. That can be quite true. You might say, well, that goes without saying. But actually, I don't know about that. Maybe some people that are in a bad condition put themselves there, and maybe they're less deserving of our pity than other, poor, unfortunates who just wound up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Another implicit premise that's being played upon here that a lot of duty-driven people like myself fall prey to, when one feels pity for a person, one ought to do something to help them. Now, is this necessarily true? I don't think so. I think it depends on whether you have the capacity to do so, whether that's not going to interfere with other valuable projects, whether you have a duty to do so or not, whether somebody else really ought to take care of it, what the effects are going to be. These are important to lay out, these implicit premises, and to start questioning them, because when we do that, we can see that this is not a good argument. Here's how we can represent it graphically. So person B is the person who is in a bad situation, right? And they are in some sort of pitiable state, we'll call it, right? And because they have that pitiable state, person A, who's the one who's supposed to accept the claim, is made to feel the emotion of pity. Along with that, they go through this believing that X is true will make B's situation better, and they want B's situation to be better, because that's what it means to pity them, so they think X is true. Now, what's wrong with this? Why is this a fallacy? Well, from the beginning, it's substituting an emotion, a feeling of pity or compassion or guilt, in place of good reasons to accept or reject a claim. There could still be good reasons, but the fact that I feel a certain way is not, for most claims, a good reason to accept the claim. It might also be used to get an audience to accept reasons or evidence that wouldn't normally be seen as providing good grounds for a claim. So, it's not necessarily the case that you're just trying to make somebody feel sad or pity. You could be throwing all sorts of, reasons in there, but maybe they're not particularly good reasons. Sometimes a duty or responsibility to care or to intervene or assist on the part of the audience is going to be argued for or assumed without good grounds. In some cases, it's even used to silence or neutralize opposed views, which is not a good practice for critical thinking. So these are all reasons why we want to be careful about this kind of argument. Let's talk about common situations now. What are some cases in which you can expect to see this? So, it's going to usually be used in situations where a person is or will potentially be in genuine distress or harm. Sometimes, though, the harm is actually imaginary or just apparent or even made up. When somebody engages in a fake charity appeal, that can be understood as a appeal to pity. Now, common contexts are charity appeals. Many charity appeals basically just consist in an appeal to pity. There could be really good reasons why we ought to give charity, and not just good reasons in general, but to this particular charity or for this cause. But if all you're doing is trying to make your audience feel bad, and give them an opportunity to not feel that sense of pity or guilt or whatever by contributing to your charity, you're really just doing a fallacy. A lot of this in politics and policy making, the unfortunates who are going to be affected by this and the people affected by this. And I have to say that Republicans and Democrats are probably equal offenders when it comes to this, at least from where I sit. There's a lot of that goes on. Educational settings. This can work in a lot of different ways. Those poor students in the terrible classrooms in the bad neighborhoods with 45 students in a room and, not even a teacher's aide to help them. That's a terrible situation, isn't it? Does that mean that, we should accept all sorts of claims? Maybe not. Those other students who are being, unfairly disadvantaged in this way or disadvantaged in that way. What's going to happen to the students who have invested so much time and work in this? We can go on and on and on. And we can talk about teachers, and we can talk about administrators, and we can talk about parents. All sorts of possibilities for appeals to pity. Personal relationships. This happens a lot. I'm badly off. I'm damaged, so you need to give me a pass on why I'm such a jerk. What's going on there is you're making the claim, you should give me a pass for being a jerk because mommy didn't love me, or daddy left, or pick whatever. I've had a string of bad relationships. That's an appeal to pity. Criminal and civil cases, you'll see this. My client should not be found guilty because, sending them, a great example. When Governor Ryan in Illinois was sentenced, and he did some terrible things. He did things that actually led to people's death. And he engaged. He didn't just. He wasn't the creator of a culture of corruption, but he was at the center of the network of corruption in Illinois for many, many years. Terrible guy. He gets sentenced. It's pretty late in his life, and they're going to send him to a prison. And people are saying, "Oh, no, you shouldn't send him to prison. Maybe house arrest because he's an old guy." Well, he did the crime, right? The argument there is he shouldn't be punished the way that other people are because this would be unfair to him. Cases where we're proposing new or old ideas against opposition. Sometimes people do this. Discussions in social media, comments, or other places on the internet. One variety of this is, you hurt my feelings the way that you talk to me, therefore you're wrong. Now that's a terrible argument, but it's one that often gets made. Let's look at some examples. Now this is one that I get every semester. I get some student, and it's sometimes in terms of, I need an A, sometimes I need something that's not an F, and it usually goes like this. Oh, please, professor, I really, really tried in this course. I know I didn't hand in most of the homework on time or according to the standards, and I did fail the final exam, but it was a high F. I got like a 59. Can't you give me some leeway here? And then here comes the sob story. If I don't pass, my grade point average is going to drop and I'll be on academic probation. So the idea is, well, I should pass this student. Now, this is an interesting kind of case, because whenever you have a student like this, if their grade point average is so bad that getting an F in your class is going to like cast them into perdition, it's because they've made a whole bunch of other screw-ups in the past. They didn't just wind up there at the edge of the precipice by, everything going great. Sometimes students will actually try to snow me and they'll say, I'm getting A's in all my other courses. I don't understand why I'm getting a low grade in your course. And then most of the students that's the case, that try to tell me that, I go in and I look at their transcripts and I see C's and D's and F's. And it's never the A student who actually says, I'm getting A's in everybody else's classes, but yours, I don't understand what's going on. Now this is an appeal to pity, and the pity is being, it's the person who's making the appeal is saying, you should pity me. All right, let's look at the next one. This is one that gets done by a lot of charities for just $1.50 a day, and it could be whatever price you like. For just the price of a cup of coffee, you could help these poor, malnourished, mistreated children. Look at their faces. See the hovels they live in. You can't just stand by, can you? And the conclusion is you should make a contribution to this charity, and you should do so right now. Here's the phone number. Sign up, just $1.50 a day. I'm not knocking charities, by the way. So don't get me wrong about that. I am saying that charity appeals should not just be fallacious appeals to pity. You should be able to give some good accounting of what's actually going on. And before you shell out money to a charity, ask yourself, is this the best way I can spend this money to help these people? How much of this money is actually going to the administrators? There was some huge scandals in the past where very little of the money, a very small proportion, was actually going to help the poor people. Doesn't matter whether it's poor people, animals, the environment, whatever you want. If there's a good case to be made, it can be made without bringing out all the violins and doing all the heartstring tugging. Example 3. Here's a famous catchphrase. What about the children? You can justify just about anything. I think there's a South Park episode like this by saying, what about the children? A lot of times it's not actually about the children when people are saying, what about the children? So here's a good example from the current morass of American K through 12 education. I understand that you want some sort of accountability on the part of teachers, but you have to understand, all that the schools are doing now is teaching to the tests. The kids just aren't getting the kind of education they need, with room for their own creativity and imagination and growth. We have to stop these high-stakes standardized testing of K through 12 students. Now, when somebody makes that sort of appeal, do they really have the best interests of the children at heart, or are they trying to avoid having standardized tests because they don't like standardized tests, because they don't like teachers being held to some sort of standards, however bad the standards may be, however misguided they may be? That's something that you want to open up and ask about. This could in fact be, this is one of these cases where you could in fact have somebody who's really, really concerned about the children, and maybe they can actually make a case for why the standardized test regime that we have in place now is worse than other alternatives. But what's going on here is they're saying, just feel bad for the students and give the teachers a pass. So that's not a good argument there. It could be made into a good argument. I would love to see people doing more work and finding some great alternative to standardized testing that does provide accountability and flexibility, but it's not happening much these days. How do you spot the fallacy of appeal to pity? There's always going to be some reference to the bad conditions that some being has to endure, and also to one's capacity or duty to alleviate those conditions. It might be the polar bear on the ice floe floating around, and feel bad for that polar bear, which if you were close to it would maul the hell out of you and just tear you apart. But at a distance, they're kind of fuzzy and pitiable, and we need to do something. There's how you spot it. See whether the argument's main grounds for why you ought to believe something or do something rest on a feeling of pity or guilt or responsibility, or whether they consist in reasoning and evidence, independent of those feelings. Also, you want to pay attention to the broader context that is produced or will end up in the bad conditions. Sometimes people are just, victims of circumstance, and maybe we should feel pity for them. Sometimes people have been, criminally mistreated. Sometimes people have been manipulated. They've been screwed out of their rights. We ought to feel sorry for those people. But ask, does the person making the appeal or the person on whose behalf the appeal is being made bear any responsibility? Did they create the mess that they're in? Are they laying in the bed that they made? And then also ask, are you the person who should feel responsible? If you're the kind of person who's like me, who, believe it or not, actually has a fairly sympathetic nature and tends to be fairly compassionate to other people, and also has a strong sense of duty, it's pretty easy to get me to think that I probably should take care of that person and that person and that person. And, I remember spending my birthday money every year when I was a kid, sending it all to the Jerry Lewis Telethon. But the question that we have to ask ourselves if we want to do some sort of critical thinking, mental, emotional self-defense is, are we really responsible for the people that other people are telling us that we're responsible for? Now, what's not the appeal to pity? What is not this fallacy? This is for students, so you don't mix it up with other fallacies. There's a few other ones. Arguments in which a person argues that accepting one belief or doing one thing is going to lead to some serious adverse consequences are actually a slippery slope if you have a whole chain that you're going to lead to. Why do we want to distinguish that apart from appeal to pity? Because slippery slope actually has a very specific structure to it. So we want to identify it as what it is. Arguments that focus on what adverse consequences might result for yourself or those connected with you are not the appeal to pity. They're more the appeal to fear, saying, look, if you don't, believe this, then you're going to get hurt, or we're going to hurt your kid, or we're going to hurt your mom or dad, or we're going to hurt your friends. Now, arguments that claim that because as a society we are responsible for something, all of us as individuals are similarly responsible, that's a different fallacy. That's the fallacy of division, where you're saying that what's true of the whole is equally true of the parts, when it's not. Not every argument that focuses on adverse outcomes for a person is necessarily a fallacious argument, so don't misdiagnose arguments as appeal to pity when they're actually not. Let's talk now about how you might avoid making the fallacy of appeal to pity. One thing you can do is don't allow yourself to get taken in by and then start spreading sob stories. If you're going to say that somebody deserves our charity or our assistance or, justice or, pity or whatever, you want to research the situations to determine who really does need help or protection, who does deserve compassion, and what kind, how much, why, so that you can tell other people and give them good grounds for thinking they should help out. See if you can provide some better grounds, which don't just appeal to emotion for the claims that you want to make. You don't need to appeal to pity to make good claims that you actually have evidence for. Also, you really want to distinguish who actually bears responsibility to assist or protect other people and who doesn't, on the basis not of our feelings, but on rational grounds. Grounds that you can justify to other people, that can be sort of, not necessarily universally, but at least generally applied. The last thing that I'm going to say is this video is part of a series discussing fallacies, and it belongs to an entire channel devoted specifically to critical thinking, reasoning, and argumentation. So if you like this video, if you find it useful, if you think other people would benefit from it, if you think other people are committing this fallacy, share it with other people, and come back to the channel from time to time to check out what we've got that's new. And we've got a whole bunch of other fallacy videos either in production or already produced that you might find useful as well.